Many of us begin the journey of healing with a quiet urgency. There is a sense that something inside us needs to be corrected. We read the books, we watch the videos, we practice the techniques, all with the hope that we might finally become calmer, more disciplined, less reactive, more whole. But underneath that effort, there is often an unspoken assumption that who I am right now is not acceptable. And when that assumption goes unquestioned, healing itself can become another form of self-rejection. I've sat with people who are deeply committed to improving themselves, and yet the energy behind their effort is not compassion, it is pressure. It is the feeling that they must get rid of their anxiety, silence their emotions, control their impulses. They speak about their struggles almost as if they were enemies. But what if those struggles are not enemies? What if instead they're expressions of something that once made sense? You see, the mind and body are not designed to sabotage us. They are designed to protect us. Every pattern, every reaction, every coping mechanism, no matter how disruptive it may seem today, likely began as an intelligent adaptation to an environment where something was missing or overwhelming. So when we try to fix ourselves without understanding where these patterns come from, we are, in a sense, rejecting the very strategies that once helped us survive. And that rejection doesn't bring healing, it deepens the divide within us. Because now, not only are we carrying the original pain, we are also carrying judgment toward the way we learn to cope with that pain. Real healing asks for something different. It asks us to slow down, to become curious rather than corrective, instead of asking, how do I stop being this way? We begin to ask, what is this part of me trying to do for me? And that question changes everything. Because in that moment, we are no longer standing against ourselves, we're beginning to stand with ourselves. There's a profound shift that happens when we move from judgment to understanding. The inner tension softens, the need to force change begins to loosen. And in its place, something far more powerful emerges, compassion. Not as a technique, but as a recognition that given what you've experienced, the ways you learn to think, feel, and respond are not signs of failure. They are signs that at some point in your life, you did exactly what you needed to do to get through. And perhaps healing doesn't begin with changing that, but with honoring it. The roots of present pain often lie in early adaptation. When we look at our present struggles, our anxiety or difficulty in relationships or patterns of self-doubt or emotional overwhelm, it is very tempting to see them as problems that began in adulthood. After all, that is where we feel them most vividly. But in my experience, and supported by decades of developmental and trauma research, these patterns rarely begin where we notice them. They begin much earlier. Human beings are remarkably adaptive, especially in childhood. A child's brain and nervous system are not fixed. They are shaped continuously by the environment, by the quality of connection, the presence or absence of safety, the emotional tone in the home. And here is something essential to understand. A child does not experience the world objectively. A child experiences the world in terms of safety and connection. If the environment feels unpredictable, emotionally distant, or overwhelming, the child does not say, something is wrong with my environment. The child's nervous system adapts. This is where early adaptations are formed. As highlighted in the work of Bessel van der Kolk, the body stores these experiences even when the conscious mind cannot recall them. The nervous system learns patterns of response, hypervigilance, emotional shutdown, people-pleasing, not because the child chooses them, but because they are necessary. For example, a child who grows up in an environment where emotional expression is not welcomed may learn very quickly to suppress their feelings. Not because they lack emotions, but because expressing them threatens connection. Another child sensing tension or instability may become highly attuned to others, reading moods, anticipating reactions, trying to maintain harmony. This sensitivity, which may later be labeled as anxiety, was once a form of intelligence. It was a way of staying safe. These adaptations are not mistakes. They are solutions. But here is where the difficulty arises. What was once adaptive can become limiting when the environment changes. The child grows up. The external conditions may shift, but the internal patterns remain. So now, as adults, we find ourselves reacting in ways that seem disproportionate or confusing. We withdraw when we want to connect. We overextend ourselves when we need rest. We feel unsafe even when there is no immediate threat. And we ask, why am I like this? That question, when asked without context, often leads to self-blame. A more compassionate and accurate question is, when did I learn that this was necessary. Because when you trace the pattern back, not with judgment but with curiosity, you often find a younger version of yourself, doing the very best they could in a situation that asked too much of them. And something important happens in that recognition. The present moment begins to make sense, not as a failure of who you are, but as a continuation of what you had to become. And from that place of understanding, healing becomes possible, not by erasing those adaptations, but by gently updating them, by showing your system slowly and patiently that what was once necessary may no longer be needed in the same way, and that you are no longer the child who had to carry it alone. The conflict between authenticity and attachment. This is one of the deepest and most painful tensions I have observed in human development, and it often operates so quietly that we don't even recognize it in ourselves. Every child comes into the world with two fundamental needs. The first is authenticity, the ability to feel what they feel, express what they experience, and exist as they truly are. This includes their emotions, their curiosity, their anger, their joy, their vulnerability. The second is attachment, the need to be close to caregivers, to feel safe, to be seen, soothed, and accepted. Without attachment, a child cannot survive. Now, ideally, these two needs would exist in harmony. A child would be able to be fully themselves and remain securely connected to those who care for them. But in many environments, this is not what happens. In some families, certain emotions are not tolerated. Anger may be met with punishment, sadness may be dismissed, fear may be ignored. In other situations, a parent may be physically present but emotionally unavailable or overwhelm themselves. And in these moments, the child faces an impossible dilemma. Do I remain authentic and risk losing connection, or do I maintain attachment by suppressing parts of myself? For a child, this is not a real choice. They will always choose attachment because attachment is survival. So what happens is not that the child stops having feelings or needs. It is that they learn to disconnect from them. They begin to shape themselves in ways that preserve connection. They become the easy child, the strong one, the one who doesn't ask for too much, the one who keeps the peace. And from the outside, this may even be praised. But internally, something significant is taking place. The child is learning that who they truly are is not entirely acceptable. And over time, this disconnection from authenticity becomes normalized. It no longer feels like something that happened. It feels like who they are. Years later, as adults, this early adaptation shows up in many forms. We may struggle to say no, even when something feels wrong. We may feel anxious in relationships, constantly seeking approval or fearing rejection. We may not even know what we truly feel or want because we learned so early to tune that out. And again, we ask ourselves, why am I like this? But when we understand the conflict between authenticity and attachment, the question shifts. We begin to see that what looks like insecurity was once loyalty. What looks like confusion was once protection. What looks like weakness was once wisdom, because the child made the only choice they could. They chose connection over self-expression. And the cost of that choice is something many of us are still living with. So healing in this context is not about blaming the past or rejecting the need for attachment. It is about gently reclaiming authenticity. It is about creating, often for the first time, a space within ourselves where our thoughts, our emotions, and our needs are not threats to connection, but are welcome. And that is not something we force. It is something we rediscover slowly, compassionately, as we begin to understand that we no longer have to abandon ourselves in order to belong. Symptoms are messages, not mistakes. This is a perspective that can fundamentally change the way we relate to ourselves. Because most of us have been taught to see our symptoms as problems to eliminate. Whether it's anxiety, depression, chronic stress, addiction, or even physical illness, the instinct is often the same. How do I get rid of this? And that instinct is understandable. Many of these experiences are deeply uncomfortable, even painful. Of course, we want relief. But in my clinical experience, when we approach symptoms only as enemies, we miss their meaning. You see, the human body and mind are not random in their responses. They are deeply intelligent systems, shaped by experience, constantly trying to maintain some form of balance, even under difficult conditions. So when a symptom appears, the more useful question is not simply, how do I stop this? But rather, what is this trying to tell me? For example, consider anxiety. We often treat anxiety as something irrational, something that needs to be calmed or controlled. But anxiety, at its core, is a signal. It is the nervous system saying something doesn't feel safe. Now that something may not be obvious in the present moment, it may not even be connected to the current situation in a logical way. But the feeling itself is real. And if you listen carefully, we may begin to see that the anxiety is not the problem, it is the messenger. The same can be said for many forms of coping that we tend to judge harshly. Addiction, for instance, is often misunderstood as a lack of willpower or discipline, but when we look more closely, it reveals something else. As articulated by Gabor Maté, the question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. Because addictive behaviors, whether towards substances or activities, are often attempts to soothe emotional distress, to numb what feels unbearable, or to create a temporary sense of relief. In that sense, the behavior is not senseless. It is purposeful. It is trying to solve a problem. Now, this doesn't mean that all coping mechanisms are healthy or that they should remain unchanged, but it does mean that before we try to remove them, we need to understand what role they're playing. Otherwise, we risk taking away the strategy without addressing the underlying need. And when that happens, something else will often take its place. The same principle applies even to physical symptoms. Research in mind-body medicine has shown that chronic stress, emotional suppression, and unresolved trauma can contribute to a wide range of health conditions. The body, in a very real way, expresses what the mind has had to silence. So rather than asking, why is my body betraying me, we might begin to ask, what has my body been carrying for me? This shift from opposition to curiosity is where healing begins to deepen. Because when you start to see your symptoms not as mistakes, but as messages, you stop fighting yourself. And instead, you begin to listen. You begin to develop a relationship with your own inner experience that is based not on control, but on understanding. And in that space of understanding, something remarkable can happen. The very symptoms that once felt like obstacles can become guides that point you gently but persistently toward the parts of your life and your history that are asking to be seen, felt, and finally healed. Healing requires compassion before change. This is not always what people expect to hear, because many of us have been conditioned to believe that change comes through effort, discipline, and pressure. That if we just try hard enough, push ourselves enough, we will eventually overcome whatever is holding us back. And while effort has its place, there is something deeper that often gets overlooked. The human nervous system does not transform under pressure. It transforms in the presence of safety. And compassion is one of the primary ways we create that safety within ourselves. In my work, I've often encountered individuals who are incredibly hard on themselves. They monitor their thoughts, judge their emotions, criticize their behaviors. There is a constant internal voice saying, you should be better than this, you shouldn't feel this way, you need to fix this. And underneath that voice, there's usually pain. Not just from the present moment, but from a much earlier time when being accepted, being loved, perhaps even being safe, felt conditional. So the inner critic develops, not as an enemy, but as a protector. A part that believes that if it can keep you in line, if it can correct you quickly enough, it might prevent rejection, failure, or hurt. But over time, that voice doesn't create safety. It creates tension. It keeps the nervous system in a state of alertness, of contraction. And in that state, true healing cannot occur, because healing requires openness. And openness cannot exist where there is fear. This is where compassion becomes essential, not as a vague idea or a positive affirmation, but as a genuine shift in how we relate to ourselves. Compassion says, there's a reason I feel this way. There's a history behind this reaction. I may not fully understand it yet, but I am willing to be with it rather than against it. And when that attitude is present, something begins to soften. The resistance eases. The internal battle quiets. The need to force change begins to dissolve. Interestingly, this is not just a philosophical idea. It is supported by research. Studies in self-compassion, particularly by Kristen Neff, have shown that individuals who treat themselves with kindness during moments of difficulty are actually more likely to grow, to take responsibility, and to make meaningful changes, not less. Because when you are not overwhelmed by shame, you have the capacity to reflect. When you are not consumed by self-criticism, you can stay present with your experience long enough to understand it. And understanding is what leads to transformation. So paradoxically, the less you try to force change, and the more you allow yourself to be exactly as you are with curiosity and compassion, the more space there is for genuine change to emerge, not as something imposed from the outside, but as something that unfolds from within. And this can feel unfamiliar at first, because many of us have learned to motivate ourselves through pressure, not kindness. But over time, as you begin to practice this different way of relating, you may notice something important. That the parts of you once tried to fight begin to relax. And in that relaxation, they become more willing to shift, not because they're being forced, but because for the first time, they feel safe enough to do so. Awareness is the beginning of transformation. It may sound simple, almost too simple. And yet, in my experience, it is one of the most profound truths in the process of healing. Because many of us try to change without first seeing. We try to stop behaviors, control emotions, adjust our thinking, often with great effort. But beneath that effort, there is often a lack of clear awareness about what is actually happening inside us. And without that awareness, change tends to be temporary, or it creates new forms of struggle. You see, awareness is not just intellectual understanding. It is not simply knowing about yourself. It is the capacity to observe in real time your thoughts, your emotions, your bodily sensations without immediately reacting to them, without trying to fix them, and without turning away. It is a kind of presence. And for many people, this is not easy, because when we begin to pay attention, we don't just notice the surface. We begin to encounter what has been beneath it all along. Old feelings, unprocessed pain, patterns that were formed long ago. So the instinct is often to distract, to analyze, or to correct. But awareness asks something different. It asks us to stay, to notice, for example, how your body responds in a moment of stress, how your chest tightens, how your breath shortens, how a familiar thought arises. To observe how quickly the mind moves to self-judgment. Why am I like this? I shouldn't feel this way. And instead of following those thoughts, awareness gently brings you back to the experience itself, not to change it, but to see it clearly. Because when something is fully seen, it begins to lose its unconscious hold over you. What was automatic becomes visible. What was reactive becomes understandable. And in that space, there is a possibility, perhaps for the first time, to respond differently. Not because you're forcing a new behavior, but because you are no longer completely identified with the old one. This is where transformation begins, not in the act of trying to become someone else, but in the act of becoming aware of who you have been. There's also something deeply compassionate about awareness, because when you truly see your patterns, not just on the surface, but in their origins, you begin to recognize the intelligence behind them. You see how a certain reaction developed, how a belief took shape, how a protective mechanism became part of your identity. And that recognition naturally softens judgment. You don't have to force compassion, it arises on its own. So awareness is not passive. It is active, but in a different way. It is the willingness to turn toward your experience with honesty and presence, even when it is uncomfortable. And over time, that willingness creates space. Space between stimulus and response. Space between feeling and action. Space between who you were conditioned to be and who you are capable of becoming. And it is within that space that real transformation quietly unfolds. Healing is not about becoming someone new, but returning to who you were. This is a point that often brings both relief and a certain kind of grief, because many people come into the process of healing with the idea that they need to reinvent themselves, that somewhere out there is a better version, more confident, less anxious, more in control, and that healing is the process of becoming that person. But what I have observed again and again is something quite different. Healing is not about adding something new. It is about uncovering what has been there all along. You were not born anxious. You were not born ashamed. You were not born disconnected from yourself. At some point in your life, these patterns developed gradually, intelligently as responses to your environment. And while they may feel like part of your identity now, they are not the essence of who you are. Beneath those layers, there's something intact. There's a capacity for joy, for curiosity, for connection, for authenticity. But for many people, these qualities have been covered over not because they disappeared, but because it was not always safe for them to be expressed. So the process of healing is not about constructing a new self. It is about gently removing what has been in the way. And this is where the grief can come in. Because as we begin to reconnect with ourselves, we may also become aware of how long we have been disconnected, of the ways we had to adapt, of the parts of ourselves we had to silence in order to belong, to be accepted, or simply to get through. And that realization can be painful, but it is also deeply human, because what you're feeling in that moment is not failure. It is recognition of what was lost and what is still possible. In my experience, when people begin to reconnect with their authentic selves, there's often a sense of unfamiliarity at first. It can feel strange to say what you truly feel, to set a boundary, to rest without guilt, to experience emotion without immediately trying to suppress it. And that discomfort is natural because you are not becoming someone new. You're remembering someone you had to leave behind. So this process requires patience. It requires allowing yourself to move slowly, to explore, to make mistakes without harsh judgment, to understand that reclaiming authenticity is not a single moment. It is a gradual unfolding. And importantly, it is not something you force. Because authenticity cannot be forced. It emerges when the conditions are right, when there's enough safety, enough awareness, enough compassion. Then, what has always been within you begins to surface, not all at once, but in small, meaningful ways. A moment of honesty, a sense of clarity, a feeling of being more at home in yourself. And over time, these moments begin to connect until one day, you may realize something quietly profound. That healing did not make you into someone else. It brought you back to yourself. So before you rush to fix yourself, before you try another method, another routine, another way of becoming better, I want to invite you to pause just for a moment. And instead of asking, what's wrong with me? Begin to ask, what happened to me? Approach yourself with the same curiosity you would offer to someone you deeply care about. Notice your patterns, not as problems to eliminate, but as stories waiting to be understood. The next time you feel triggered, the next time you catch yourself in an old habit, the next time that familiar voice of self-criticism arises, don't rush to silence it. Stay with it.